The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady backdrop to the chatter of passengers settling into their seats. Overhead bins clicked shut, seatbelts snapped into place, and the faint scent of recycled air carried the promise of hours in the sky. Amid the sea of faces, one stood out. A young black teenager, headphones in, eyes glued to a book, quietly minding her own world. That's when it happened. A sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "Excuse me, miss. Take those earbuds out right now." The flight attendant's words carried not just authority, but disdain. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. The girl looked up, startled. She tugged one earbud out. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The attendant's tone hardened, echoing across the rows. "Don't play games with me. I said no devices during announcements. Do you think the rules don't apply to you?" Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was public, sharp, and deliberate. A man in the aisle seat frowned, muttering, "She wasn't even bothering anyone." But the attendant pressed on. The teen lowered her gaze, fumbling to tuck her earbuds away, her cheeks burning as if every eye on the plane was piercing her skin. Her hands trembled. She wanted to disappear into the fabric of the seat. Then came the finishing blow. The attendant sneered and said loud enough for the cabin to hear, "You kids think you can do whatever you want. Not on my flight." Gasps rippled through the passengers. Someone shifted in their seat. Another whispered, "That's uncalled for." A phone camera quietly tilted upward, recording. The girl bit her lip, forcing herself not to cry. She was just a passenger, yet in that moment she felt like a spectacle, put on trial before strangers. And as the silence hung heavy in the air, one truth lingered. Dozens of witnesses now carry the memory of her humiliation. The sting of the flight attendant's words still lingered in the air, like a slap that hadn't faded. The teenager sat frozen, earbuds tucked away, eyes on her lap as though the floor itself might swallow her whole. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was alive. Rows of passengers exchanged glances, their faces shifting from curiosity to discomfort. A whisper floated from the back. "Did you see how she spoke to that girl?" Another murmured, "Unnecessary. Way too harsh." The once casual hum of conversation was replaced with a current of unease. Phones appeared, subtle at first, tilted at angles just low enough to avoid detection. A red light blinked on one screen, recording. Another passenger typed furiously, sending live updates to a group chat. Fingers swiped, thumbs hovered, lenses slowly rose. The flight attendant either didn't notice or didn't care. She strode down the aisle with clipped footsteps, chin held high, as if she had restored order. But to the witnesses, order hadn't been restored. It had been shattered. One passenger leaned toward another. "It's 2025. You can't treat people like that and expect no one to speak up." The words were hushed, but the intent was loud. The teen sat stiff, clutching the edge of her seat. Her thoughts raced. Why did she have to single me out? Was it because I'm young, or because I'm black? Her chest tightened with the weight of unspoken questions, ones she dared not voice aloud. Meanwhile, a father in the row ahead quietly angled his phone, the shaky image capturing the teen's distressed face. The screen zoomed in, framing not just her pain, but the injustice unfolding before dozens of silent jurors. The cabin had become a theater. Every passenger was now both audience and participant. A woman whispered, "This is going online the second we land." A young man added, "Knows." Before that, "Some airlines have Wi-Fi." His finger tapped the upload button. The teenager shifted, aware of eyes on her, aware of cameras pointed her way. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the center of a spectacle she never asked for. And with each whisper, each recording, each digital click, The story stretched beyond the confines of the plane. It was no longer about one girl and one attendant. It was about the imbalance of power, the echoes of prejudice, the small moments of cruelty that become magnified when strangers decide not to look away. The air inside the cabin seemed thinner now. People fidgeted, cleared throats, coughed, tiny gestures betraying their discomfort. The hum of the engines remained steady, but beneath it, another hum was rising, the low, relentless buzz of social accountability waiting to ignite. A phone screen lit up in the dim cabin. Notifications pinged. A comment appeared beneath a shaky video. Unbelievable. Who lets this happen? The seed had been planted. What began as whispers in the cabin was already reaching the wider world. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane leveled at cruising altitude. The steady drone of the engines filled the silence, but the atmosphere inside was anything but calm. What had started as an awkward confrontation was now simmering into something darker, something heavier. The flight attendant returned. Her heels clicked against the narrow aisle, each step sharp and deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to another clash. She stopped beside the teen's row, folding her arms across her pressed uniform. "I'll say this one more time," she announced, her voice pitched loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "You need to follow instructions immediately when spoken to. Do you understand me?" The girl looked up, her throat dry. "I did. I put them away," she said softly, pointing at her backpack. But her words vanished beneath the attendant's cutting reply. "Don't argue. You're holding up safety protocol." Passengers shifted in their seats. A mother in the next row hugged her child, held closer as though bracing for turbulence. Another man sighed, shaking his head. The air grew thick with unease. The teenager's voice wavered. "I wasn't trying to—" "Enough!" The attendant cut her off, eyes narrowing. "This is not a debate." Her attempt to defend herself was silenced, erased by authority. She sank back into her seat, shoulders folding inward as if to shield herself. Her heart pounded. Her palms were damp. She wanted to vanish, to blend into the seat cushion, to not exist in that moment. But humiliation has a way of multiplying. The attendant leaned closer, her tone quieter now but laced with venom. "I've dealt with your type before. Don't push me." A collective intake of breath rippled through the rows. Phones that had been lowered earlier lifted again. Wide eyes reflected glowing screens. One passenger mouthed silently to another. "Did she just say that?" The teenager blinked back tears. Her voice trembled, fragile but desperate. "Please, I wasn't doing anything wrong." The attendant scoffed, straightening her posture. "Then perhaps you should start acting like it." A man 2 rows back couldn't hold it in. "Hey, that's enough," he called out. Heads turned toward him. He gestured toward the girl. "She's a kid. Let it go." But the attendant's glare cut him down, and he retreated into silence. No one else spoke up. Not yet. The engines roared steady outside, but inside the cabin, tension climbed like pressure in a sealed chamber. The girl sat trapped at 30,000 feet, with no escape and no voice that anyone seemed willing to hear. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some muttered to themselves. Others whispered into phones, narrating what they saw. The shaky glow of screens documented every word, every look, every humiliation pressed upon the girl like a weight too heavy to carry. The teen bit her lip. She thought of her mother, Worth, waiting at the airport. If only she knew. If only she were here. Her mother's voice had always been her shield. But tonight, she was alone. The attendant lingered a moment longer, letting the silence and fear do the work. Then she turned sharply on her heel and strode down the aisle, leaving behind a trail of discomfort in her wake. The girl exhaled shakily, but relief never came. The damage had already been done. Every second of it lived on screens, whispered in passenger conversations, etched into the memory of strangers who could feel the wrongness of what they'd witnessed. Minutes stretched like hours. Each time the attendant passed by, her eyes darted to the teen with a pointed glare, a reminder that the power imbalance remained firmly in her hands. Each look was another unspoken warning. And though the sky outside was dark and endless, inside the cabin, it felt suffocating. No place to run, no way to fight back, just humiliation, circling over and over, replayed in real time through whispers and recordings. One woman murmured to her seatmate, "This isn't going to stay on this plane. You know that, right?" The reply was a nod. "Not with everyone filming. It's already bigger than she realizes." The teenager stared out the window, her reflection faint against the night sky. She wanted to scream, to demand fairness, but her words had been stolen, silenced by authority, drowned by bias. She felt like a prisoner in the clouds. And all around her, witnesses sat frozen in complicity, some too afraid to speak, others waiting for the storm they knew was brewing. Because humiliation at 30,000 feet has nowhere to land, it only builds, heavier and heavier, until it comes crashing down for everyone to see. On screen, the scene would widen into a full cabin shot. Dozens of faces tense, uneasy, illuminated by the glow of phones. The music would rise, deep and pulsing, echoing the storm yet to come. The airplane cabin carried an eerie quiet, broken only by the low thrum of engines and the occasional seek. Oh! But down the aisles, unseen sparks were already catching fire. Screens glowed in trembling hands. Videos that began as shaky recordings were now being shared, tagged, and posted. What had been confined to a single cabin was, in seconds, spilling out into the world. A ping, then another. Notifications stacked on a passenger's phone. The first clip, 43 seconds of raw humiliation, uploaded to Twitter. Caption: "Flight attendant humiliates young black teen for no reason. Witnessed by everyone on board." Within minutes, the clip found traction. Retweets, comments, outrage. The digital tide had begun. Split screen. While the teen sat small and silent by her window, her face pale with shame, her image appeared on thousands of screens across the globe. Angles varied. Some showed the sneer of the attendant, others caught the moment her trembling voice was silenced. Each clip carried its own proof, its own angle of injustice. Together, they told a story impossible to deny. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, murmurs swelled into hushed debates. "It's already online," whispered a young man scrolling furiously. "Look, it's blowing up." His seatmate leaned closer, eyes wide at the numbers climbing. "No way it's this fast." But it was. The internet does not wait. On TikTok, the clip looped endlessly. Comments stacked like dominoes. "This is sickening. She's just a kid." Imagine treating someone like this at 30,000 feet. A thunderous beat underscored the montage. Likes flooding in. Hashtags forming. Influencers stitching their takes before the plane even touched the ground. Back on board, the teen remained unaware of the storm forming around her. She kept her eyes low, headphones still tucked away, hands pressed against her knees as though bracing against invisible waves. She thought the shame was hers alone. She didn't know she was no longer invisible. She was Bekho, Ming a symbol. By the time the plane reached mid-flight, mainstream media had caught wind. "This is sickening. She's just a kid. Imagine treating someone like this at 30,000 feet. A thunderous beat underscored the montage, likes flooding in, hashtags forming, influencers stitching their takes before the plane even touched the ground. Back on board, the teen remained unaware of the storm forming around her. She kept her eyes low, headphones still tucked away, hands pressed against her knees as though bracing against invisible waves. She thought the shame was hers alone. She didn't know she was no longer invisible. She was becoming a symbol. By the time the plane reached mid-flight, mainstream media had caught wind. A headline flashed across digital feeds. Passenger records disturbing incident of alleged racial bias on flight. Another outlet published, teen humiliated in front of passengers. Social media demands accountability. The attendant, striding down the aisle with her professional smile, had no idea. To her, she had asserted control, reminded a passenger of rules. To the world outside, she had become the face of unchecked cruelty, her words immortalized in pixels and replayed with fury. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks. Some refreshed feeds obsessively, whispering updates to those nearby. 10,000 views already. Wait, it just hit 100K. The numbers multiplied like wildfire. The cabin wasn't just carrying passengers anymore. It was carrying a story exploding beyond its walls. And as the storm raged online, the teen's image transformed. No longer just a girl on a flight. She was the daughter, the sister, the friend that viewers projected their own lives upon. She was every young person ever silenced, every voice dismissed, every moment of humiliation replayed in public view. On Twitter, hashtags trended. Flying while black. Justice at 30K feet. Accountability. In the air, news anchors cut into evening broadcasts. Split screens showed hulking heads dissecting the footage, analysts discussing corporate responsibility, lawyers debating passenger rights. The cabin became a case study in systemic mistreatment. Meanwhile, on the plane itself, the hum of engines remained steady, but the air grew denser with each passing minute. The girl, still clutching herself against the seat, had no idea the world was watching. And when she shifted, gazing out at the night sky beyond the window, the reflection staring back wasn't just her own. It was the weight of millions of eyes, millions of voices, carried in silence across the digital ether. A father scrolled his phone, whispering, "They're tagging the airline's CEO. They want answers." The irony loomed just beyond the horizon, unknown to him. The flight attendant's footsteps echoed again as she passed, chin high, ignoring the tension she had birthed. But outside the cabin, her every step was already condemned, dissected, judged. The storm grew louder. Instagram reels, Facebook reposts, commentators drawing parallels to past scandals, protest accounts calling for boycotts. The incident had shifted from personal cruelty to public indictment. And with every second, the girl's humiliation turned into something larger. Her silence became a rallying cry. Her bowed head became a symbol of endurance. Her pain was no longer hers alone. It was being carried by millions who refused to look away. On screen, the montage would quicken. Split screens of tweets, hashtags exploding across timelines, breaking news graphics flashing, view counts skyrocketing, 100K, 500K, 1,000,000. Comments scrolling so fast, they blurred into a wall of outrage. The sound design would thunder, a rising roar of voices overlapping, echoing, unrelenting. The audience would feel the weight of social backlash crashing like a storm wave. And over it all, one chilling truth would crystallize. The MoMA, and that flight attendant thought would pass unnoticed, was now etched into history. By the time the plane prepared for descent, the outside world was already ablaze. Networks prepped morning segments. Hashtags flooded politicians' feeds. Advocacy groups issued statements. The girl, silent in her seat, was now a name trending across continents. She didn't yet know it. But the humiliation meant to diminish her had instead ignited a movement. The storm had broken, and it would not be contained. The plane began its slow descent. Lights dimmed to a soft glow as the cabin prepared for landing. Passengers adjusted seatbelts, stowed trays, and powered down devices. But beneath the hum of the engines, tension still hung like a storm cloud. The teenager sat silent by the window, eyes red-rimmed from the weight of humiliation. She hadn't spoken in minutes, retreating inward, shrinking smaller with each passing glance from the flight attendant. Phones across the cabin still buzzed with notifications. The storm outside was raging. But inside, she felt utterly alone. The attendant made her rounds once more, smile clipped and brittle, rehearsed professionalism thinly veiling her irritation. She stopped near the girl's row again, tilting her head with condescension. "Make sure your belongings are properly secured. We wouldn't want another incident, would we?" Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few shook their heads in disbelief. The teen opened her mouth to respond, but thought better of it. She lowered her gaze, her silence mistaken for compliance. And then, something shifted. From 2 rows ahead, a woman's voice rang out, calm, steady, but with a weight that commanded attention. "Actually, there is something we need to address." Heads turned. Passengers craned their necks. Even the flight attendant stiffened, caught off guard. The woman rose slowly from her seat. She had traveled quietly the entire flight, dressed in a simple blazer, no makeup, hair tied back. To most, she was just another traveler blending into the crowd. But the way she carried herself now, firm, deliberate, hinted at something more. Her eyes swept the cabin, then landed on her daughter. The teen's breath caught. Relief and disbelief washed over her. The attendant forced a smile. "Ma'am, please remain seated while we prepare for landing." But the woman raised her hand, silencing her with a simple gesture. Her tone never wavered. "I've watched enough." Passengers held their breath. The engines rumbled beneath them, but inside the cabin, silence roared louder. The woman straightened her shoulders, her voice carrying with crisp authority. "My name is Elaine Carter, and as of last week, I am the new Chief Executive Officer of this airline." Gasps erupted. Eyes widened. A ripple of shock swept through the rows like a current. Phones that had been lowered lifted again, recording the moment that would become the pinnacle of this already viral story. The flight attendant froze. Color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, then closed, words failing her for the first time all flight. The CEO stepped closer to her daughter, resting a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. Her voice softened. No one speaks to my child like this. Not here. Not anywhere." Applause broke out from the back rows, hesitant at first, then swelling as passengers found courage in the revelation. Some cheered. Others shook their heads in vindicated disbelief. The attendant stammered, I didn't realize—" Elaine cut her off. "That's the problem. You didn't realize because you didn't care. You saw a young black girl and decided her voice didn't matter. But it does. And now the entire world is watching." The words hit like thunder. The attendant's composure cracked, her false smile collapsing into panic. She tried to speak, but nothing came. Meanwhile, the teen's chest loosened for the first time in hours. The weight pressing her down lifted as her mother's presence filled the space. She blinked back tears, not of shame but of relief, of empowerment. The captain's voice echoed through the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." But no one moved. All eyes remained on the confrontation unfolding in the aisle. Elaine's gaze swept the passengers. "Let this moment be clear. This airline will not tolerate prejudice. Not under my leadership." More cheers followed, voices rising with approval. Phones caught every angle, ensuring the world outside would see not just the cruelty, but the justice that followed. The flight attendant lowered her head, silent now, the weight of her mistake bearing down harder than gravity itself. As the wheels touched the runway, the cabin erupted, not in fear, but in catharsis. Passengers clapped, not for the landing, but for the courage of a mother who stood when no one else dared. The teen leaned against her mother, eyes shining. She no longer felt small. She no longer felt invisible. She had been seen, heard, defended. And for every person watching the videos online, the lesson rang clear. Authority without empathy crumbles when truth steps forward. On screen, the music would swell, dramatic, triumphant. Faces would blur into slow motion. The relieved teen, the stunned passengers, the flight attendant broken by her own arrogance. The day after the flight, the airline's headquarters no longer hummed with its usual corporate rhythm. Phones rang endlessly. News vans crowded the sidewalks outside, cameras trained on the towering glass building where executives scrambled to contain the firestorm. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. Rows of executives sat stiffly in leather chairs, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. A giant screen on the wall replayed the viral video on a loop. The flight attendant's harsh words, the teenager's trembling silence, and the stunned gasps of the passengers. Each replay felt like a hammer striking the same bruise over and over. At the head of the table stood Elaine Carter, no longer just a protective mother in disguise, but the CEO of an airline under siege. Her presence was steady, her voice low but commanding. "This is not just a public relations crisis," she said. "This is a mirror. It shows who we are when we think no one is watching. And it is unacceptable." The room fell silent. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided her gaze, as if the floor held answers their leadership had failed to find. Elaine clicked the remote, and the screen shifted. Headlines flashed. Airline faces backlash over viral flight video. Systemic bias in the skies. Public demands reform. The words cut deeper than any shareholder report ever could. "We can't undo what happened," she continued, her eyes steady. "But we can decide what happens next. Accountability starts now." The first directive came swift and sharp. The flight attendant was suspended, pending a full investigation. But Elaine made it clear this wasn't about a single employee. It was about a culture that had allowed behavior like this to fester unchecked. She ordered immediate mandatory retraining for all crew and staff, programs rooted in empathy, equity, and accountability. She pushed for a new reporting system where passengers and employees alike could raise concerns without fear of dismissal. She announced an independent review panel to examine systemic discrimination within the airline itself. Executives exchanged nervous glances. For years, problems had been swept aside, hidden beneath polished press releases. But now, under Elaine's leadership, the harsh light of public attention left nowhere to hide. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, social media kept roaring. Advocates praised the CEO's swift action. News outlets dissected the reforms in real time. Families who had endured similar humiliations found courage to speak out, their stories amplifying a collective demand for change. And through it all, Elaine kept her focus and the bigger picture. She wasn't just protecting her daughter anymore. She was reshaping an entire system, one that had for too long failed those it claimed to serve. In the end, the fallout wasn't just scandal. It was transformation, a wound forced into the open so it could finally heal. The roar of outrage, the storm of headlines, the tension in the cabin, all of it gave way to something quieter, something deeper. In the end, this was never just about a single flight or a single mistake. It was about a truth too often forgotten. Respect is not a privilege earned, but a right owed to every person, no matter their age, their color, or their status. The teenager, once silenced, now walked taller. Her pain transformed into a voice amplified by millions. Her mother, more than just a CEO, became a reminder that power means nothing unless it is used to protect, to heal, and to change. Even the flight attendant, left to face the weight of her actions, stood as a symbol of what happens when dignity is denied, and how quickly the world demands it back. The lesson was simple, but undeniable. Respect and humanity must be universal. Because one careless act of cruelty can ignite a storm, but one act of courage can inspire a movement. And now, to every viewer, the story leaves a challenge. Carry this lesson forward. Treat others with the dignity you would want for yourself. Because change begins not in headlines, but in everyday choices. The story you've just witnessed is more than a headline. It's a reminder that dignity, respect, and empathy are choices we make every day. If this message moved you, don't let it end here. Share this story so others can reflect on its lesson. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling the stories that matter, and leave a comment below, because your voice adds to the change we all need. Together, we can turn one moment of injustice into a movement for accountability.